Forget everything you know about funerals. These are the most bizarre and macabre death rituals in history. Tier 1. The surface. Dancing with the bones in Madagascar. In Madagascar, death is not the end, but a never-ending party where the guests of honor are the long-decayed bones of ancestors. This is Famadihana, a grand carnival for both the living and the dead. Every 5 to 7 years, when the stone doors of the tomb are pried open, a unique scent of dust, spices, and old burial shrouds emerges. Younger generations enter the cold, dark crypt, carefully carrying the white shrouds containing their ancestors' remains into the sunlight. What follows is cheering, unrestrained cheering, because tears are absolutely forbidden here. The local people believe the tears of sorrow will turn into cold moisture, seeping into the shrouds and causing the ancestors to shiver on their way to the spirit world, thus hindering their journey. Therefore, the air is filled not with mournful dirges, but with the upbeat rhythms of trumpets and hand drums. The remains of a great-grandmother who passed away decades ago, and an uncle who died just a few years back, are placed side by side. Family members gently wrap them in new silk shrouds while whispering updates about the family into their ears, the birth of a newborn, the marriage of a young couple. After the bones are rewrapped, pieces of the old shrouds that once enveloped the ancestors are sometimes distributed to the young couples in the family. These fragments are considered powerful relics, believed to bless future generations and bring good fortune and fertility. At the heart of the ceremony, people lift the shrouded remains and, treating them like dance partners, spin and cheer to the music. However, this ancient tradition faces a grim challenge from modern medicine. Since the plague bacterium can survive in corpses, some health organizations consider opening tombs and handling remains a significant risk for spreading the disease. This adds a layer of complex controversy to the ritual. The shocking limb-breaking burial culture. Imagine a dying old man personally carving his final gift to himself, a coffin that will hang from a 100-meter cliff. In the mountains of Sagada in the Philippines, this is how the Igorot people greet death. First, they carve their own coffin from a single log, often engraving it with a gecko pattern, in the hope that their soul will be able to climb freely like the lizard. When he finally takes his last breath, his body is not laid flat. Instead, it is tied tightly to a wooden stool, known as the death chair, facing the door of his home. This isn't merely for display. It's a final social gathering, allowing the deceased to receive the last farewells and conversations from friends and family as if he were still living. During this time, a ritual called panagapoi is performed. This smoking process not only slows decomposition, but is also seen as a farewell for the soul, as the smoke is believed to guide it to gradually separate from the body and ascend to the sky. However, the most gruesome part of the funeral follows. To fit the body into the coffin, which is often little more than a meter long, the tribesmen performing the ritual must forcibly break the deceased's bones, forcing the body into a fetal position. They believe that a person should end their life in the same posture it began, completing a full life cycle. Afterward, the coffin is carried up to a high cliff and suspended from its face. This sky burial stems from their cosmology. The ground below is a damp, cold place of confinement, while the sky is the warm, bright abode of the ancestral spirits. Hanging the coffin high is a proactive and dignified way to place the deceased back into the world of the spirits. The height of the coffin directly reflects the deceased's social status during their life, turning the entire cliff face into a chronicle of family honor. For the mourners below, the most sacred moment of the ritual is waiting for the bodily fluids, known as igat, to drip from the coffin's cracks. They believe this is the final gift from the deceased, a sacred substance mixed with wisdom, strength, and life essence. To be touched by it means the ancestors' energy is returned to the earth, ensuring a bountiful harvest in the coming year. Yet, with the spread of Christianity and modern ideas, this ancient custom is now extremely rare, mostly reserved for the most respected tribal elders. Ghana's Mercedes-Benz coffins. This tradition originated from a legendary tale. In the 1950s, a carpenter was commissioned to build a palanquin shaped like a cocoa pod for a chief. However, the chief passed away before it was completed, so his family simply used the ornate palanquin as his coffin. The event caused a sensation, heralding the era of fantasy coffins. In Ghana, how you leave this world is far more important than how you came into it. The belief here is that your coffin is your business card in the afterlife. These coffins don't just realistically reflect a person's profession. They sometimes serve as a proverb. A lion-shaped coffin signifies that the deceased was the head of the family, possessing supreme authority. Similarly, a Mercedes-Benz is seen in Ghanaian culture as a vehicle of a leader. Therefore, this coffin symbolizes that the deceased was a leader who guided their family to success and will ride the soul vehicle to smoothly and quickly reach the afterlife and begin a new existence. Likewise, an eagle represents not only leadership, but also the foresight to communicate with the divine. The family of a fisherman might order a giant tilapia coffin, while a cocoa farmer might lie in a massive cocoa pod. On the day of the funeral, the entire community celebrates as they parade this work of art through the streets. The 2,000-day suicidal mummification of Japanese monks. This was a self-entombment that began while still alive, a mummification funeral that took years to complete, known in Japan as sokushinbutsu, meaning to become a Buddha in this very body. The ultimate goal of this practice was not death, but to follow the legend of Kukai, the founder of Shingon Buddhism, and enter a state of eternal meditation. By achieving physical incorruptibility, the body would become a vessel of immense spiritual power, continuing to pray for the salvation of the world until the coming of Maitreya, the future Buddha. To achieve this, the practitioner had to wage a brutal war against their own body through a process called tree eating. The training was divided into 1,000-day units. For the first 1,000 days, they abstained from all grains, eating only nuts and seeds found in the mountains to completely eliminate body fat. For the next 1,000 days, their diet was further reduced to bark and roots, pushing the body to extreme dehydration. The final step in this hellish ordeal was to drink a poisonous tea made from the sap of the lacquer tree. The toxins would induce violent vomiting to expel the body's last remaining fluids, and essentially, embalm the body from the inside out. When the monk felt his life was fading, he would enter an underground stone tomb and sit in a meditative posture, ringing a bell each day. When the ringing finally stopped, the tomb was sealed. 3 years later came the final judgment. If the body had decayed upon opening the coffin, the monk, though unsuccessful, was still given the highest honors and burial. But if the body was incorrupt, he was revered as a living Buddha. He was no longer considered dead but a guardian who had entered eternal meditation. He would be cared for by the temple for life. His robes changed periodically, and he was worshipped by believers. The success rate of this life-defying practice was incredibly low. Of the hundreds who attempted it throughout history, only about 24 succeeded. It was once concentrated in the sacred mountain region of Dewa-Sanzan in Japan, and was finally outlawed in the late 19th century, closing a truly unbelievable chapter of history. Now, we will delve deeper to look at those ancient beliefs that border on the taboo. Tier 2, below the surface, Zoroastrian sky burial, the final decomposition of the human body. In ancient Persia, the most devout funeral was one that made your body disappear completely, without a trace. In their faith, when a person dies, a corrupting demon known as Nasu is born from within. It flies from the north as a fly to instantly attach to the corpse, making it the ultimate source of impurity. This uncleanness threatens every living person who comes into contact with it. Therefore, before the body could be moved, an ancient ritual called Sagdid, or the dog's gaze, had to be performed. A sacred four-eyed dog, one with spots above its eyes, was brought to view the deceased. They believed the dog's holy gaze could drive away the demon. Afterward, only professional corpse bearers, the nucessalers, could touch the body and transport it to a circular structure known as a dakma, or Tower of Silence. The platform at the top of the tower was a precisely engineered decomposition field, divided into 3 concentric circles, the outermost for men, the middle for women, and the innermost for children. The corpse bearers would unwrap the shroud, place the naked body on a designated stone slab, and silently retreat, awaiting the arrival of the sky's scavengers, vultures. Within hours, the flesh was completely stripped away. After the bones were bleached by the sun for a year, they were collected and thrown into a deep well in the center of the tower. The well was lined with lime, sand, and charcoal. which would break down the bones and filter rainwater, ensuring that the water that eventually returned to the earth was pure and undefiled. The Torajan funeral, living with the deceased. In Toraja, Indonesia, death is not a period but a long comma. When a family member passes away, they are not immediately buried, but are kept at home and treated as if they are merely sick. The body is specially preserved, and like a living person, they are brought meals, have their clothes changed, and are spoken to daily. Children play around their sleeping grandfather as if nothing has changed. This state can last for months, or even years, until the family is saved enough for a sufficiently grand funeral. They believe that death is not an instantaneous separation, but a slow transition, and as long as the deceased remains in the home, their presence continues. The Viking ship burial, a fiery voyage to Valhalla. For the Vikings, death was not an end, but the beginning of another great expedition. When a great chieftain or warrior died, his funeral had to be worthy of his epic life. The Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan personally witnessed and recorded the funeral of a Rus chieftain. After the chieftain's death, his body was temporarily buried while a slave girl was coerced to volunteer to accompany him to Valhalla. For the next 10 days, the clan would feast and drink in celebration, while the slave girl was cared for by a priestess known as the Angel of Death. On the day of the ceremony, the chieftain's body was dressed in fine clothes and placed on a massive ship. The slave girl, after a final farewell exchange with the clan elders, was stabbed to death by the priestess and placed in a tent on the ship alongside the chieftain. Finally, the clan set the ship ablaze, letting it sail in roaring flames, carrying wealth, sacrifice, and glory toward the Hall of the Gods. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed this, such as the famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway, where an ornately decorated funeral ship was found containing the remains of 2 women, 4 sleds, and countless treasures. The practices above might be seen as cultural differences, but the rituals that follow begin to touch the darkest corners of human nature. Prepare yourselves. We are going deeper. Tier 3. The Deep Waters. The Sati ritual of India. For the widows here, this burning flame was perhaps a form of release. In parts of ancient India, the custom known as Sati required a widow to immolate herself on her husband's funeral pyre. Among martial castes like the Rajputs, this was promoted as the ultimate expression of marital fidelity. But the truth was a story of extreme patriarchal oppression. In that society, a widow was seen as an inauspicious person, a burden on the family. It was better for her to die an honorable and voluntary death than to live in shame. But this so-called voluntarism was often an elaborate deception. Before the ceremony, the widow would be given opium or cannabis and led to the site in a trance-like state. If she recoiled in fear at the last moment, her relatives and the villagers watching would not hesitate to use long bamboo poles to push her back, holding her down in the fire until she stopped struggling. Every step of the ritual was filled with cold-blooded theatrics. The widow would wear her most magnificent wedding dress and circle her husband's pyre 3 times to the sound of drums and music. Finally, she would climb onto the pyre, place her husband's head on her lap, and her eldest son would light the flames. At that moment, the surrounding music would swell to its loudest, to completely drown out her screams as she was consumed by the fire. And behind it all lay the darkest of economic motives. According to the laws of the time, a widow had the right to inherit her husband's property. Her self-immolation meant that this property could be legally divided among her husband's family. So-called family honor was nothing more than a disgusting veil for greed. Don't think this is just distant ancient history. In 1987, an 18-year-old newlywed named Roop Kanwar was burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre. In the aftermath, tens of thousands came to worship this newly minted Sati goddess, Tibetan sky burial. This ritual also involves offering the body to vultures, but the sky burial of Tibetan Buddhism is a far more thorough form of human disposal. After being kept for several days while lamas chant scriptures, the deceased's body is transported to a designated burial site, or dortro. There, a master known as a Rogyapa performs the dissection. He makes the first cut down the back. Then, he systematically strips the flesh from the bones and removes the internal organs, which are chopped into pieces. The core purpose of the process is to ensure the soft tissues are consumed as quickly and completely as possible. When the vultures have devoured all the flesh, the ritual reaches its climax, which is also the ultimate act of charity. The rogue Yappa collects all the remaining bones, including the skull, and smashes them into fragments with a stone hammer. He then mixes the fragments with roasted barley flour, or tsampa, and kneads them into balls. These tsampa balls, now mixed with bone marrow, are once again offered to the vultures. At this point, the very last trace of the deceased's body has been given without reservation to other living beings. The ceremony is only considered complete when the vultures have consumed everything, leaving nothing behind. The Chinchorro mummies of Chile. You have likely never seen a burial method that involves disassembling and then reassembling the deceased. Thousands of years before the pharaohs began building pyramids, a more ancient and unsettling mummification technique was born on the coast of Chile. For the ancient Chinchorro people, the goal was not for the soul to be resurrected in the afterlife, but for the deceased to live on eternally in this world. Their funeral was a chilling art of completely deconstructing and reconstructing the human body. The process began with artisans cutting off the head and limbs and removing all internal organs, muscles, and the brain. Then, using tools, they would meticulously scrape any remaining flesh from the bones. Next, they would reassemble the dismantled skeleton using sticks and reeds, binding and reinforcing it like a model. Then, they would tightly pack the body cavities with plant fibers and ash to restore a sense of fleshiness. Finally, they would either resuture the person's own skin back on, or apply a new skin made of clay mixed with black manganese. This was fitted with a carved mask and a wig made from the deceased's own hair. This technique was applied to everyone in their society, regardless of gender or age, even to miscarried fetuses. Archaeologists have found numerous meticulously reconstructed infant mummies, suggesting that in their view, every life was worthy of being granted eternity. The final product was a doll, with an interior of bone and sticks, and an exterior of skin and clay. These mummies were not buried, but were kept with the family, continuing to live alongside them as true members of the household. Now, welcome to the bottom of the iceberg. We are about to confront the ultimate expressions of love, buried in the deepest parts of human nature. Layer 4, the dark abyss. The Yanomami eat their kin. In the depths of the Amazon rainforest, the burial rituals of the Yanomami people are driven by a bone-deep fear. They believe that a person's soul, the boar, becomes lost after death, and can be captured by shamans from enemy tribes to be used in curses against the living. Therefore, the sole purpose of the funeral is to completely and rapidly erase all physical traces the deceased has left in the world. The ritual has 2 steps. First, the body is wrapped in leaves and hung in the forest, allowing nature to decompose all soft tissue over 30 days. Afterwards, the family collects the bones for a grand cremation ceremony. Relatives, accompanied by ritualistic and song-like wailing, use a long wooden mortar made from a hollowed-out tree trunk. They rhythmically crush the remaining bones, grinding them into a fine white powder, which is carefully stored in sealed gourds. Toward the end, a portion of the ash is mixed into a thick soup made from fermented plantains and is consumed first by the immediate family. But it doesn't end there. About a year later, the tribe holds a final feast called the Reahu. Members of all allied villages are invited, and the entire remaining store of ashes is mixed into large quantities of banana soup and consumed by all the guests. This is not savagery, but in their eyes, the most profound form of protection and love. By consuming their loved one into their own bodies, his soul remains forever safe within the family, never to be separated, and never to be used by their enemies. And when the last grain of ash is swallowed, the deceased's name becomes an absolute taboo, never to be spoken again. The funerary cannibalism of the Fore people. This is a case where ancient ritual and modern medical horror perfectly intertwine. Among the Fore tribe of New Guinea, the heart of the funeral was endocannibalism. Women and children would consume the bodies, particularly the brains, of their deceased relatives as a sign of love and respect, believing it would keep the person's spirit within the family. However, starting in the mid-20th century, a mysterious disease began to spread among the tribe's women and children. Its name, kuru, means to tremble in the local language. Patients would first develop an unsteady gait, which progressed to violent full-body tremors, accompanied by uncontrollable pathological laughter. They would eventually die, fully conscious, from being unable to swallow. The Fore people were convinced it was a curse from enemy sorcerers. The key here was the gendered division of the ritual. Adult male warriors rarely participated in the practice, while women and children consumed all parts of the body, including the brain. When scientist Daniel Gajdusek injected brain tissue from a Kuru victim into chimpanzees, years later, the chimps developed the same laughing sickness. The truth was finally revealed. The culprit was neither a curse nor a virus, but a nearly indestructible pathogen, a prion. This misfolded protein destroys the brain by inducing normal proteins to mutate. All the clues finally formed a perfect loop. A ritual born from love, through the specific act of women and children consuming infected brains, had unintentionally become the most efficient transmission route for prions. The wisdom of the ancestors had turned into a contagious, laughing plague, the mass human sacrifices of the Aztecs. In 1487, the Aztec civilization built a production line to death. At the top of their Great Pyramid, they conducted a corridor of death on a terrifyingly efficient industrial scale. To celebrate the dedication of the main pyramid in their capital, a death feast that lasted for 4 full days began. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war formed an endless line, slowly ascending the pyramid steps. At the summit, a priest awaited them. With a sharp obsidian knife, he would expertly slice open a person's chest, reach inside, and pull out the still-beating heart, holding it high as an offering to the sun god. Immediately after, the heartless body would be tossed down the hundreds of steps like garbage. This is no exaggeration. Right next to the pyramid, archaeologists found the evidence, a massive altar known as a tsompantli, or skull rack, densely packed with thousands upon thousands of skulls. But perhaps most chilling were the rituals they held for the rain god. For him, they would sacrifice children, believing that their tears could summon the rain. Therefore, before the sacrifice, they would torture the children to ensure they shed enough tears. These seemingly grotesque rituals, each in their own way, explore the end of life. After seeing all this, are there similar rituals where you live? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoy this kind of strange and dark history, please subscribe to Forbidden Frames. If you have more interesting ideas, tell me in the comments, and I will research them. Good luck to you.